There are plenty of exciting new bikes rumoured for release later this year, so here we go with my 11 picks of the best. KTM recently went from 1290 to 1390 with their Super Duke Super Naked, and they're expected to do the same with their other 1290 powered bikes, like the Adventure models and the Super Duke GT Sports Tourer. But spied out testing, we've got a whole bunch of different flavours on the horizon, from a standard 1390 Adventure to a completely restyled rally version, but perhaps most exciting of all is the super spec road-going variant that looks to be built to go head-to-head with the likes of the Ducati Multistrada V4 Pikes Peak. We're talking aggressive styling, a 17-inch front wheel, and even some supposedly downforce-inducing winglets. So it's basically a larger sibling to the 890 SMT that they launched last year, except with this new 1390 engine on board, you can expect almost double the power. Should be an absolute rocket ship, and I, for one, am all for it. At the same time though, it looks as though they're working on some new tech for the big adventure models, with a prototype of the 1390 being put through its paces at the recent Erzberg Rodeo Enduro event in Austria, but with one key difference. You see, this particular version had their new AMT system on board, which apparently stands for Automated Manual Transmission. The idea is the bike takes care of the clutch on your behalf, a bit like Honda's recently announced e-clutch system, and then you can either have it in an automatic mode, so it'll choose the gears on your behalf, or you can use the up and down buttons on the switchgear or a shift lever in the traditional spot down by the left foot peg. It's basically the same in capability as Honda's DCT bikes, but achieved in a lighter, more affordable way and using electronic actuators on the clutch and gearbox as opposed to a completely different pair of clutches and gearboxes. And I know some of you will comment that nobody really wants an automatic motorcycle, but look, Honda's DCT has been a great seller for some time now, and so it seems like loads of manufacturers are trying to follow suit. Yamaha have filed patents for an automatic version of their middleweight CP2 parallel twin, which of course powers a wide range of bikes in their lineup, from the MT-07 Naked to the XSR 700 Retro to the R7 sports bike, the Tenere 700 adventure bike, and the Tracer 7 sports tourer. So there is a bit of a chance that this sort of tech will be coming to some slightly more affordable bikes in the near future. But then, at the opposite end of the spectrum, BMW also have some plans for a similar system called ASA, or Automated Shift Assistant. Honestly, I had no idea that automatic motorcycles were in such hot demand, but you can't deny that this seems to be a huge focus for the top manufacturers this year. Now, BMW are expected to launch it on their upcoming R1300 GS Adventure, which is of course the larger tanked long-distance version of the 1300 GS that was released at the start of this year. Some type approval documents have been spotted on the internet with some fairly high-level details, such as top speed and total weight, both of which are slightly worse than the new 1300 GS, but of course that would be owing to the larger fuel tank. So if you want a big bike that can go hundreds of miles between stops and you won't even need to change gears, then I reckon the end of this year is a safe bet for that announcement. If, however, you want something a little more traditional, then it also looks like a stripped-back air-cooled GS is on the way to be powered by their R12 platform. In this lineup so far, you've got the R12 Cruiser and the R1290 Sporty Naked, but spotted out testing, there's been a pretty tall-looking variant with knobbly tyres, spoke wheels, and a 21-inch front wheel. So it looks like a bit of a replacement for the Urban GS, but with a slightly more serious off-road bias spec, which should make for a decent competitor for the likes of the Triumph Scrambler 1200 XE. This could just be the perfect antidote for all those tech-ridden adventure bikes if you're more so a fan of the simple and traditional. Now, remember the CB1000 Hornet from Honda? It was announced at EICMA last year in November and looked to be a very enticing proposition with a more budget-friendly build than the CB1000R that it kind of replaces, and yet presumably with a lot of the same performance characteristics. Personally, I thought it looked really quite good, so it's been a little bit disappointing that things have gone pretty quiet ever since. No further details or expected release dates have been announced, and in fact it all seemed a bit too quiet on this front and had me wondering if it had ever be released at all. But recently, Honda confirmed to Visor Down that it's still expected at the back end of 2024. It's thought that this bike will make around the 140 or 150 horsepower mark from its Fireblade derived inline 4, and it also gets a pretty aggressive styling package, so let's hope there's more announced soon and that it rides as good as it looks. Now, one of the other big announcements from last year's show season was a pair of brand new hybrid motorcycles from Kawasaki with the Z7 Naked and the Ninja 7 sports bike. And the promise was pretty strong from Kawasaki, with them claiming 250cc levels of fuel economy and yet 1000cc supersport levels of acceleration from a standing start. And while I am yet to borrow one to find out whether it's any good for myself, it looks as though Kawasaki are plowing ahead with rolling out even more hybrid motorcycles. You see, according to Bike Whale, patent filings have been found that show a new cruiser hybrid and a new adventure bike hybrid, which would, it's assumed, be named Eliminator and Versys respectively. Now, it's expected they'll use the same 451cc parallel twin along with the electric motor and battery to assist, but whereas the current hybrid models have the battery located somewhere under the seat, these designs show it moved for both these expected bikes to be up above the engine. This will allow them to give the Eliminator a more typical low-slung cruiser look without the big bulky battery under the seat, and they'll use a split fuel tank either side of the battery to maintain a fairly regular aesthetic. The Versys, on the other hand, has a single tank that's wide and wraps around the new battery position, but again, there are still benefits for the chassis, with plenty of suspension travel still possible, as is typical of the adventure bike stance. Speaking of which, a new Tenere 700 appears to be on the way, with these spy shots showing a new visual design for what looks like an updated Tenere World Raid, although it is a little hard to make out because of all the camouflage. Still, there are clearly some new details on here, like the revised headlight and bodywork, along with a new linkage for the rear suspension, but perhaps the most interesting new feature for me is that right-hand switchgear, which I believe is the exact same as the XSR 900 GP press bike that I'm currently borrowing at the moment. It may seem like a minor detail, but actually you'll see that there's no room here for the traditional cable throttle that's currently used on their CP2 powered bikes. And indeed, from looking at the XSR 900 that I've currently got in the studio, it does use a more modern ride-by-wire throttle, and so it looks like the Tenere could be about to get a bunch of more up-to-date features that this type of throttle enables, like throttle maps, riding modes, traction control, and maybe even cruise control. Now, it's not always a necessity on a fairly simple off-road biased adventure bike like this to have all the latest and greatest tech, but if you're looking at some of the competition like the KTM 790 Adventure or the Honda Transalp or the Suzuki V-Strom 800 DE, you know, the Tenere does look a little bit light on features at the moment, and so this update could make it look a lot more competitive in that regard. Also at Yamaha, designs for a new R7 sports bike have surfaced, and one of the key changes here, apart from some fairing tweaks, would be the new radiator fan cover, which might again not sound like a big deal, but stay with me on this one. You see, motorcycle.com report that the idea for it is to divert air up and away from the cylinder head, which might suggest a slightly more punchy version of this bike is on the way, and the improvement in cooling is a necessity in order to be able to push that engine a little bit harder. And to be honest, with some of the other sports bikes hitting the market at the moment in that segment, like the Triumph Daytona 660 and the Suzuki GSX ATAR, the current 72 horsepower of the R7 is indeed looking a little bit on the modest side, and so a few more horses might just be what the doctor ordered. Meanwhile, CFMoto are pumping out some great looking bikes at the moment, and none more so in my opinion than the 500 SR Voom, which has a bit of a retro sports bike look about it with the twin daytime running lights at the front end. Now, don't believe this bike is initially scheduled to come to the UK, but you never know in the long run, and I'd certainly be interested because it's not just the styling that's caught my eye, nor the fact that those lights are actually the air intakes too, but also the fact that it'll run on a 500cc inline 4 which one assumes will have a similar sound, feel and power delivery to Kawasaki's brilliant ZX4RR. I really enjoyed that bike when I borrowed it earlier this year, and so here's hoping the 500SR Zoom does eventually make it to European markets at some point. So I guess in the meantime we'll just have to make do with their recently unveiled 675 SRR. This one is scheduled to be sold globally, and it looks like it could be a real competitor in the middleweight sports bike market. So if you want to find out why, as well as get all the details that we know so far, then do check out the video on the screen now in case you haven't seen it already. I'd also love to know down in the comments below which bike from today you're most interested in, so do let us know. Hit subscribe as well if you've not already to see more of the latest motorcycle news and rumours like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.